The Capital Wasteland was once the beating heart of a nation. Before the bombs fell, Washington, D.C. stood as a monument to American ambition, a city of marble facades, bureaucratic sprawl, and symbolic architecture. It was a place where policy met power, where monuments to liberty and conquest lined the National Mall, and where the machinery of government churned behind closed doors. The city was not just a seat of governance. It was a cultural and historical archive, a living museum of the American experiment. But beneath the grandeur, tensions simmered. The 21st century brought resource scarcity, international conflict, and a growing sense of desperation. The United States, once a global superpower, found itself locked in a brutal war with China over dwindling oil reserves. The Anchorage front became a blood-soaked stalemate, and the nation turned inward, fortifying its borders and militarizing its institutions. In the years leading up to the Great War, Washington, D.C. became a fortress. The Pentagon expanded its reach, the Enclave solidified its presence in secret facilities, and civil liberties eroded under the weight of national security. Vault-Tec, a private corporation with government ties, constructed underground shelters across the country, including Vault 101 in the outskirts of the capital. These vaults were marketed as havens, but many served as social experiments, testing human behavior under extreme conditions. Vault 101 was designed to remain sealed indefinitely, its inhabitants cut off from the outside world. It was a microcosm of isolation, a controlled environment meant to preserve a fragment of humanity while the surface burned. On October 23, 2077, the world changed. Nuclear war erupted without warning. In a matter of hours, cities were reduced to ash, governments ceased to function, and the planet was plunged into radioactive ruin. Washington, D.C., with its symbolic importance and strategic value, was a primary target. The Capitol building, the White House, and countless federal institutions were obliterated. The Potomac River became a toxic vein, its waters choked with debris and radiation. The monuments that once stood as testaments to unity and strength were shattered, their ruins scattered across a landscape of death. The survivors, few and scattered, emerged into a world they no longer recognized. In the decades that followed, the Capital Wasteland became a study in entropy. Nature reclaimed what it could, but the scars of war ran deep. Radiation lingered, mutating flora and fauna, warping the environment into something hostile and alien. Super mutants, born from the forced evolutionary virus, roamed the streets, their origins tied to secret experiments conducted in the ruins of Vault 87. These hulking creatures were not just threats. They were symbols of scientific hubris, of humanity's attempt to control evolution and its failure to do so. Ghouls, once human, now irradiated and decaying, wandered the wasteland in search of purpose or vengeance. Some retained their minds, others devolved into feral madness. Amidst the chaos, new societies emerged. Megaton, a settlement built around an unexploded atomic bomb, became a hub of trade and survival. Its residents were pragmatic, hardened by the world around them. The Brotherhood of Steel, a techno-religious order descended from pre-war military personnel, established a stronghold in the ruins of the Pentagon, now known as the Citadel. Their mission was to preserve technology and protect humanity, though their methods were often rigid and exclusionary. The Enclave, remnants of the old government, operated from hidden bunkers and advanced facilities, seeking to restore America through authoritarian control. Their vision of purity excluded mutants, ghouls, and anyone deemed genetically inferior. The wasteland was not just a battlefield, it was a crucible. Every ruin told a story. The National Archives, once a repository of history, became a war zone between scavengers and protectors. The Museum of History housed ghouls who remembered the world before the bombs. The mall, once a place of tourism and protest, was now a hunting ground for super mutants. The metro tunnels, decaying arteries beneath the city, connected these spaces in a web of darkness and danger. They were filled with traps, collapsed passages, and the echoes of lives lost. The player, emerging from Vault 101, steps into this world not as a savior, but as a witness. Their journey is one of discovery, of piecing together the fragments of a civilization undone. The Capital Wasteland is defined by contrast. It juxtaposes the grandeur of pre-war America with the brutality of post-war survival. It asks what remains when the symbols fall, when the institutions crumble, when the people are gone. It is a place where history is not just remembered, it is lived, suffered, and reinterpreted. The ruins are not static, they are inhabited, contested, and repurposed. The Brotherhood of Steel's arrival in the Capital Wasteland marked a shift in the region's post-war trajectory. Originally dispatched from the West Coast, the Eastern chapter established its stronghold in the ruins of the Pentagon, now known as the Citadel. Their initial mission was clear: recover and safeguard advanced technology. But the Wasteland's suffering complicated that directive. Elder Lyons, leading the chapter, began to deviate from traditional doctrine. He saw the devastation firsthand, the super mutant threat, the vulnerability of settlements, the collapse of civic structure, and chose to intervene. Under his leadership, the Brotherhood began aiding civilians, defending towns, and engaging in humanitarian efforts. This ideological shift created internal tension. Some members viewed Lyons' approach as heretical, a dilution of the Brotherhood's core purpose. Others embraced it, believing that preserving humanity was as vital as preserving machines. The Enclave, operating from the shadows, represented a different vision. Descended from pre-war government elites, they emerged from Raven Rock, a fortified mountain complex equipped with autonomous defense systems and advanced weaponry. Their ideology was rooted in purity, genetic, ideological, and national. They sought to reclaim America by eliminating all who did not meet their standards. Mutants, ghouls, and even unregistered humans were deemed threats. Their presence was felt in sudden raids, intercepted broadcasts, and the quiet disappearance of dissenters. The Enclave's reemergence destabilized the region, forcing factions to choose sides and civilians to live in fear. Rivet City stood as a counterpoint to both. Built within the hull of the derelict aircraft carrier USS Independence, it was a marvel of post-war engineering and cooperation. Scientists, traders, and survivors coexisted in a fragile but functional society. The city's internal structure was compartmentalized: labs, markets, living quarters, all stitched together with salvaged materials and ingenuity. Rivet City's scientific community, led by figures like Dr. Madison Lee, pursued research into water purification, genetic stability, and medical advancement. Their work laid the foundation for Project Purity, a massive undertaking aimed at cleansing the Potomac River and restoring access to clean water. The project, housed in the ruins of the Jefferson Memorial, became a symbol of hope. But it also became a target. The Enclave sought to control it, the Brotherhood sought to protect it, and the player became its linchpin. Beyond these major factions, the Capital Wasteland was populated by countless micro-societies. Canterbury Commons, a small trading hub, was caught in a bizarre conflict between costumed vigilantes. Paradise Falls operated as a slaver outpost, its inhabitants both perpetrators and prisoners of a brutal economy. Tenpenny Tower housed wealthy isolationists who viewed the wasteland through reinforced glass and prejudice. Each location reflected a different response to catastrophe. Some sought control, others escape, and some simply endured. The diversity of these responses painted a complex portrait of human resilience and failure. The geography of the Capital Wasteland reinforced its narrative weight. The Potomac River, once a source of life, became a barrier of death. Its irradiated waters divided the region, forcing settlements to adapt or perish. The Mall, with its shattered monuments, served as a battlefield and a graveyard. The metro tunnels, decaying and dangerous, connected these spaces in a web of darkness. They were filled with traps, collapsed passages, and the echoes of lives lost. The outskirts, dotted with farms, ruins, and vaults, expanded the scope of survival. Vault 87, twisted by FEV experiments, became a source of horror. Vault 106, plagued by hallucinogenic gas, offered psychological terror. Vault 108, with its clone conflict, bordered on absurdity. Each vault was a story, a scar, a warning. The symbolic weight of the Capital Wasteland's landmarks cannot be overstated. These were not just buildings and monuments. They were the physical embodiment of a national identity, now fractured and repurposed. The Washington Monument, once a towering tribute to unity and leadership, stands damaged but salvageable. Its restoration, if undertaken by the player, allows it to broadcast the Galaxy News radio signal across the region, turning a symbol of past greatness into a beacon of present resistance. This transformation is emblematic of Fallout 3's approach to history, not as static reverence, but as mutable legacy. The Museum of History, partially intact, houses a community of ghouls who remember the world before the bombs. Their presence is a living contradiction, decayed bodies housing intact memories. They walk among exhibits that once taught schoolchildren about presidents and wars, now serving as shelter and sanctuary. The irony is thick. History preserved by those most altered by its collapse. The National Archives, similarly, becomes a battleground for preservation. Sydney, a lone scavenger, fights to protect the Declaration of Independence from raiders and decay. Her quest is not just about a document, it's about meaning. In a world where law has failed, symbols still matter. The Library of Congress, though inaccessible in-game, looms as a ghost of lost knowledge. Its absence is felt. Players encounter terminals, books, and holotapes scattered across the wasteland, fragments of a once centralized archive now dispersed and endangered. The act of collecting these pieces becomes a quiet rebellion against forgetting. Even the Capitol building, reduced to rubble and occupied by super mutants, speaks to the inversion of power. Where laws were once debated, violence now reigns. The ruins do not just represent destruction, they represent replacement. Something has taken the place of governance, and it is primal. The psychological impact of surviving in this world is woven into every encounter. NPCs speak with weariness, guarded optimism, or outright despair. Traders recount ambushes. Settlers describe losing family members to raiders or radiation. Children grow up in bombed-out schools, learning survival instead of history. The player, though often empowered by gear and experience, is not immune to this atmosphere. The game's ambient music, slow, mournful, and sparse, reinforces the emotional weight. Even silence carries meaning. In the metro tunnels, silence is tension. On the surface, it is loneliness. In settlements, it is the pause before negotiation. The game engine itself contributes to this mood. The lighting system, with its harsh shadows and limited draw distance, creates a sense of claustrophobia even in open spaces. The textures, gritty and worn, emphasize decay. The sound design, echoes, static, distant gunfire, builds a world that feels lived in and dying. These technical choices are not incidental. They are deliberate tools of immersion. Fallout 3 does not want the player to feel comfortable. It wants them to feel present. Every ruined building, every irradiated puddle, every broken terminal is a reminder. This world ended, and what remains is fragile. The culture of the post-war inhabitants reflects this fragility. Settlements are built from scrap, organized around necessity. Megaton's homes are welded together from airplane parts and sheet metal. Rivet City's compartments are repurposed naval infrastructure. Tenpenny Tower's luxury is artificial, maintained by exclusion and denial. These places are not just shelters, they are statements. They declare what their inhabitants value, fear, and remember. The Church of Adam, worshipping the bomb at Megaton's center, sees destruction as divine. Their theology is not madness, it is adaptation. In a world where death is constant, reverence for the bomb is a way to make sense of it. Even language shifts. Slang, abbreviations, and repurposed terminology reflect the collapse of formal education and the rise of oral tradition. Holotapes replace books. Terminals replace classrooms. Stories are passed through dialogue, rumor, and radio. 3 Dog, the DJ of Galaxy News Radio, becomes a cultural node. His broadcasts mix news, commentary, and music, shaping public perception and morale. He is not just a character, he is infrastructure. His voice connects isolated settlements, informs travelers, and challenges the Enclave's propaganda. In a world without newspapers or television, radio becomes the lifeline. The player's role in this ecosystem is complex. They are not just an observer, they are a catalyst. Their choices ripple outward, altering faction dynamics, settlement stability, and regional morale. Helping Big Town defend itself from super mutants changes its trajectory. Assisting the ghouls at the Museum of History legitimizes their community. Sabotaging or supporting Project Purity determines the fate of the Potomac and the people who depend on it. The Capital Wasteland's economy is a patchwork of barter, salvage, and survival. With no centralized currency and no formal trade networks, value is determined by scarcity and utility. Bottle caps, once disposable refuse, have become the de facto currency, lightweight, durable, and abundant enough to circulate, yet rare enough to retain worth. Traders operate out of hubs like Megaton, Rivet City, and Canterbury Commons, exchanging weapons, food, medical supplies, and scrap. Caravan routes are dangerous, often targeted by raiders or mutated wildlife, and many merchants travel armed or hire guards. The player encounters these caravans frequently, and their presence reinforces the idea that commerce, even in ruin, persists. Scavenging is the backbone of the Wasteland's economy. Ruins are combed for anything usable: circuit boards, pre-war food, ammunition, clothing. The metro tunnels, abandoned offices, and collapsed homes are treasure troves for those willing to risk the dangers. Some scavengers specialize, focusing on medical supplies, weapons, or rare tech. Others sell information, maps, or rumors. The player's own scavenging efforts often yield not just gear, but context. A holotape tucked in a desk drawer. A terminal entry buried in a corporate archive. These finds add texture to the world, turning loot into lore. Technology is both commodity and ideology. The Brotherhood of Steel hoards it, seeing it as sacred. The Enclave weaponizes it, viewing it as a tool of control. Rivet City scientists study it, hoping to restore lost knowledge. Raiders misuse it, wiring traps and crude defenses. The player navigates this spectrum, choosing whether to preserve, exploit, or redistribute what they find. Energy weapons, power armor, and robotics are rare and coveted. Repairing and maintaining gear becomes a skill, and the scarcity of parts adds tension to every encounter. A broken laser rifle isn't just useless, it's a missed opportunity. Medicine is equally vital. Stimpaks, Radaway, and Radex are lifelines in a world where injury and radiation are constant threats. Clinics are few, and many operate without formal training. The player often becomes a field medic, patching wounds, curing radiation sickness, and crafting healing items from scavenged components. Addiction is common. Chems like Jet, Psycho, and Buff Out offer temporary boosts, but carry long-term consequences. Some settlements have informal rehab programs, while others exploit addiction for control. The moral weight of chem use is felt in dialogue, quests, and character arcs. Education in the Capital Wasteland is informal and fragmented. Children learn through experience, oral tradition, and whatever books or terminals survive. Wasteland Survival Guide, authored by Moira Brown and Megaton, becomes a touchstone for practical knowledge. Its chapters cover combat, scavenging, and survival tactics, and the player helps shape its content through quests. The guide is more than a book. It's a cultural artifact, a symbol of resilience and shared wisdom. Its distribution across the wasteland reinforces the idea that knowledge, even in fragments, can be a form of resistance. Religion adapts to the apocalypse. The Church of Adam worships the bomb, seeing its destructive power as divine. Their theology is rooted in acceptance. Death is inevitable, and the bomb is its purest form. Other groups cling to pre-war faiths, often modified by circumstance. Some see the wasteland as punishment, others as a test. Shrines, prayers, and rituals persist, often improvised from salvaged materials. The player encounters these beliefs in dialogue, quests, and environmental cues. A chapel built from scrap, a preacher speaking to an empty room, a grave marked with a rusted sign. These moments add emotional depth, reminding players that even in ruin, people seek meaning. Art and music survive in unexpected ways. Galaxy News Radio broadcasts pre-war songs, their upbeat melodies contrasting with the bleakness of the world. The juxtaposition is intentional. It evokes nostalgia, irony, and emotional complexity. The player can collect holotapes, posters, and graffiti that reflect personal expression. Some settlements feature murals, sculptures, or improvised performances. These artifacts are not just decoration, they're declarations. They say, "We were here. We felt. We remembered." The aesthetic of the wasteland is not uniform. It is layered, contested, and deeply human. Law and justice are decentralized. Each settlement enforces its own rules, often through informal councils or charismatic leaders. Megaton has Sheriff Sims, a figure of authority and fairness. Tenpenny Tower enforces exclusion through wealth and prejudice. Paradise Falls operates on brutality and fear. The player can influence these systems, supporting leaders, exposing corruption, or dismantling regimes. Justice is not guaranteed. It is negotiated, improvised, and often compromised. The ruins of the Capital Wasteland are more than debris. They are memory encoded in architecture. Every collapsed building, scorched monument, and gutted storefront carries the imprint of a world that believed it would last forever. The pre-war society that built Washington, D.C. was obsessed with permanence. Marble columns, granite facades, and steel infrastructure were designed to endure, to symbolize stability and power. But the Great War turned those symbols into contradictions. The Capitol Dome lies fractured, the White House obliterated, and the National Mall is littered with craters and corpses. The irony is brutal. The structures meant to immortalize a nation now serve as tombstones for its failure. This visual decay shapes the emotional experience of exploration. The player doesn't just traverse space, they traverse time. Walking through the mall, past the broken remains of the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument, evokes a sense of mourning. Not just for the people who died, but for the ideals that died with them. The monuments are not just damaged, they are desecrated. Raiders use them as staging grounds. Super mutants patrol them like beasts claiming territory. The sanctity of these places has been erased, replaced by violence and survival. And yet, fragments of reverence remain. A lone settler might speak of Lincoln's legacy. A Brotherhood soldier might reference the Constitution. These echoes remind the player that memory persists, even in ruin. The metro tunnels beneath the city reinforce this theme. Once arteries of movement and connection, they are now claustrophobic labyrinths of rust, darkness, and danger. The player moves through them slowly, flashlight flickering, ears tuned to the sound of distant ghouls or the click of a pressure plate. The tunnels are not just hostile, they are haunted, not by ghosts, but by absence. Benches still line the walls. Ticket booths stand empty. Advertisements for concerts and consumer goods peel from the walls. These details are not just environmental, they are emotional. They suggest a world interrupted mid-sentence. The bombs didn't just destroy, they paused. And the player walks through that pause, feeling its weight. The Potomac River, once a symbol of natural beauty and geographic centrality, is now a toxic divide. Its waters are irradiated, its banks littered with wreckage. Bridges are collapsed or contested. Settlements on either side struggle to maintain contact. The river is no longer a connector. It is a barrier. Project Purity's goal to cleanse it is not just scientific. It is symbolic. To purify the Potomac is to reclaim a piece of the past, to make the land livable again, to restore a thread of continuity. The player's involvement in this project is not just mechanical, it is philosophical. They are asked to decide whether the future should be built on inclusion or exclusion, on cooperation or control. Vaults scattered across the region offer microhistories of collapse. Vault 101, the player's origin, represents isolation and control. Its overseer governs with paranoia, convinced that the outside world is a threat. Vault 87, twisted by FEV experiments, is a monument to scientific overreach. Vault 106, filled with hallucinogenic gas, explores psychological breakdown. Vault 108, with its clone conflict, borders on satire. Each vault is a case study in failure. They were designed to preserve humanity, but they reveal its fragility. The player's exploration of these spaces is not just about loot, it's about understanding. Each terminal, each corpse, each audio log adds to a mosaic of post-war anthropology. The ruins of corporate buildings, schools, hospitals, and homes also contribute to this mosaic. Robco facilities, Red Racer factories, and Nuka-Cola plants show the pre-war obsession with branding and automation. Schools contain lesson plans frozen in time, chalkboards still bearing equations and patriotic slogans. Hospitals are filled with skeletons, medical equipment, and the remnants of triage efforts that failed. Homes are the most intimate. A child's toy on the floor. A dinner table set for a meal that never happened. a terminal with a final message to a loved one. These spaces are not just sad, they are sacred. They are the last whispers of lives that ended without closure. The player's role in this landscape is complex. They are not just a scavenger, they are a witness. Their journey is one of interpretation. What does it mean to restore a monument? To help a settlement? To destroy a faction? Fallout 3 does not offer definitive answers. It offers context. The ruins speak, but they do not preach. They ask questions. What is worth preserving? What is worth forgetting? What does survival cost? The player must answer through action, and those actions shape the world. The Capital Wasteland's history is not linear. It is layered, recursive, and unresolved. The pre-war era believed in progress. The post-war era lives in aftermath. The player. The human stories in the Capital Wasteland are small and stubborn. In ruined houses, a mother's holotape plays on loop. A father's last note is scrawled on a terminal. A child's drawing remains pinned to a wall. These fragments create an intimacy that the grand ruins cannot. Traders tell of caravans lost to ambushes. Engineers in Rivet City debate ethics in hushed corridors, and ghouls in museums recite names no one else remembers. These are lives improvised around scarcity, where friendships form quickly and betrayals wound permanently. Community here is often pragmatic: shared water, firepower, knowledge. It is also ceremonial. Memorials improvised from scrap, radio broadcasts that stitch islands of people together, rituals that turn trauma into meaning. Survival practices adapt to landscape. Food cultivation uses salvaged hydroponics, makeshift greenhouses, and trade networks that value preservation. Water purification becomes a political act. Medicine is rationed and improvised. Skilled medics gain status, and chems create economies of hope and dependency. Knowledge is localized. A settlement keeps a teacher, a mechanic, a storyteller. Skills are currency. Respect accrues to those who can fix a pump, repair a rifle, or calm a frightened child. Violence is a constant calculus. Defend, flee, negotiate. Many residents choose walls, watchtowers, and alliances over openness. Others gamble on mobility, trading faster for greater exposure. Memory politics shape public spaces. Monuments that survive become contested symbols. Some communities restore fragments as beacons of continuity, while others repurpose statuary for practical uses: barricades, platforms, shrines. The decision to preserve or dismantle is often ideological: preserve as a lesson, or repurpose for survival. The act of preservation can be an assertion of identity, a refusal to let catastrophe erase history. Conversely, dismantling can be an admission that the old order enabled collapse and must be broken to prevent repetition. Art and humor persist in strange places. Graffiti can be elegy or insult. Scavenged posters become satirical commentary. Makeshift theaters perform plays that mock the pre-war elite or rehearse futures. Music, broadcast or live, serves as communal therapy and propaganda. Radio DJs, minstrels, and shamans hold power by shaping mood and narrative. Stories mutate into myth. Heroic deeds and petty betrayals both become legend, influencing how communities form and who they trust. Children of the wasteland grow up with different moral maps. Games teach survival skills, initiation rites mark adulthood, and stories emphasize practical cunning. Education is apprenticeship, and curiosity is both resource and liability. Some children become scavengers, others future leaders. Many become carriers of oral history, passing on names and dates that terminals once kept. Their formative experiences are brutal: loss, exposure, scarcity, and the imperative to act. Yet among them are moments of ordinary life, friendships, first loves, small rebellions, that remind the player these ruins still host human textures. Endings in the Capital Wasteland are plural. Some communities stabilize, trade networks expand, and clean water returns. Others collapse into tyranny, pillage, or slow abandonment. Many fates fall between, fragile recoveries punctuated by setbacks. The player's interventions matter unevenly. A saved town may flourish or be razed by an opportunistic warlord months later. A restored monument may inspire hope or invite conquest. Fallout 3's narrative resists tidy closure. Its endings mirror the messy, partial recoveries of real history. The emotional architecture of the wasteland endures after gameplay ends. Players carry memories of a ruined promontory, a ghoul's last confession, a city square reclaimed by daisies. These impressions are not points on a map, but residues of engagement. They shape how one imagines recovery and loss, authority and improvisation. The Capital Wasteland asks the player to attend to small economies of care, to value the everyday acts that keep people alive, and to reckon with the moral ambiguity of rebuilding. In the end, the region remains a palimpsest, pre-war intentions overwritten by the exigencies of survival, each layer readable to those who look. Its history is not a single narrative, but a chorus of claims, memories, failures, and stubborn continuities. The ruins teach that what survives is rarely the grand design, but the improvised practices of ordinary people. The Capital Wasteland is not only a catalog of collapse, it is testimony to the ways life insists on persistence in the narrowest margins. The Capital Wasteland's political landscape is uneven and improvisational, shaped by power vacuums and the charisma of survivors. Local leaders rise from competence rather than mandate. A merchant with caravans, a veteran with tactical sense, a scavenger who knows where to find parts. Authority is routinely contested. Councils form and fracture. Sheriffs are installed, then overthrown, and charismatic demagogues can turn protection into predation. Outside influences, Brotherhood patrols, Enclave incursions, military holdouts, distort local sovereignty, offering protection that often comes with conditions. The result is a constant renegotiation of authority where legitimacy is earned through pragmatic deliverables: water, security, medicine. Factional influence is unevenly felt. The Brotherhood's presence stabilizes corridors but imposes technological orthodoxies. Their patrols reduce mutant raids yet limit access to advanced gear. The Enclave's interventions are terminally coercive. When they move, they do so to centralize control or eliminate populations they deem undesirable. Rivet City scientists offer technical know-how, but few soldiers to enforce it, making them invaluable yet vulnerable. Raiders and slavers exploit gaps in governance, turning transient violence into extractive economies. Between these poles, settlements stitch together survival strategies, trade agreements, marriage alliances, punitive expeditions that create informal order even as violence punctuates daily life. Information politics are crucial. Control of radio, records, and terminals grants influence. Galaxy News Radio shapes morale and rumor. Secure terminals confer administrative power. Holotapes circulate reputations. Information scarcity makes misinformation potent. Lies can protect a town by deterring raiders or doom it by misallocating scarce resources. The player's access to knowledge thus becomes a form of leverage. Revealing the truth about a faction's plans can empower resistance or precipitate bloodshed. Withholding technical data can preserve a community or consign it to stagnation. Migration patterns reveal adaptive logics. People move toward water, trade hubs, or perceived security. Floods, radiation spikes, and raids produce sudden displacements. Slow crises like soil degradation cause incremental demographic shifts. Some settlements intentionally practice mobility, forming caravan networks that trade risk for access. Others entrench, repairing walls, hoarding resources, and developing rituals to cement community identity. Mobility breeds exchange and cultural hybridity. Entrenchment breeds specialization and ossified hierarchies. Death and remembrance inform civic rituals. Graves are pragmatic, marked with scrap, radio broadcasts, or quiet ceremonies. But they are also performative, organizing grief into social memory. Annual commemorations, informal storytelling nights, or maintained shrines produce continuity. These rituals are political acts. Who is remembered, how, and where determines communal identity and moral claims. Monuments reclaimed or repurposed become loci for such rituals, turning ruins into contested archives. Technology mediates power unevenly. Where power armor or energy weapons exist, they skew local balances. Where they are absent, savviness with scavenged tech matters. Repair knowledge is a currency. Batteries, capacitors, and clean water are fungible wealth. The scarcity of skilled technicians makes them kingmakers. Projects like Project Purity reveal this dynamic. Technical ambition requires political coordination, security, and moral vision. Without those, even the best technology fragments into trophies. Everyday ethics are pragmatic and negotiable. Theft can be survival. Mercy can be costly. Alliances with dubious actors may be necessary. Moral calculus is local and temporal. What helps a child today may imperil a village tomorrow. The player's decisions are judged within these frames, not by abstract ideals. Fallout 3 stages moral complexity through consequences that ripple and recalibrate expectations about trust, sacrifice, and governance. Finally, hope persists as a political force. Even amid brutality and scarcity, initiatives aimed at rebuilding schools, wells, radio towers garner support. These efforts are fragile but infectious. A repaired pump, a functioning clinic, a stable trade route can catalyze broader recovery. Politically, hope functions as coordination capital. It reduces transaction costs of cooperation by producing expectations that investments in public goods will be honored. The Capital Wasteland's future, then, is neither predetermined nor chaotic. It is the product of countless small bets on trust, competence, and the capacity to turn ruins into durable practices. Everyday culture in the Capital Wasteland is improvisational, threaded through necessity and memory. Meals are communal affairs when possible, stews stretched across a dozen mouths, ration slices traded for stories. Clothing is bricolage, military surplus patched with scavenged fabrics, ceremonial sashes made from pre-war banners, armor rebuilt from scavenged plate and scrap. Dress signals function and status. A technician's soot-streaked overalls mark labor. A caravan leader's repaired cuirass marks authority. Foodways adapt. Smokehouses, sun-drying, and fermented preserves replace industrial supply chains. Taste survives as identity. Recipes are guarded, spiced with nostalgia, and traded as social currency. Rituals are small and frequent. Morning watch rotations structure settlement days. Bell or radio cues open markets. A communal repair session can be both practical and cathartic. Mourning takes public form. Names read aloud at dusk, a lantern floated on a polluted stream, or a carved marker placed near a ruined doorway. Celebrations recur too. Harvest feasts staged around salvaged instruments. Anniversaries of a settlement's founding, or the day a water pump was repaired. These events compress memory, strengthen reciprocity, and rehearse civility under strain. Language evolves quickly. Old acronyms persist, but acquire new meanings. Swear phrases recycle pre-war brand names. Nicknames proliferate based on deeds or scars. Storytelling is performative and pedagogical. Elders dramatize scavenging techniques as tall tales, while children mimic legendary smugglers in ritual games. Oral histories fill gaps left by lost archives. Rumors and hoaxes circulate with the same velocity as useful tips. Literacy is uneven. Where terminals or holotapes survive, they become prized communal property, often mediated by those who can read. Artistic expression is resilient and hybridized. Murals painted on concrete salvage combine pre-war slogans with post-war irony. Found object sculptures, metalwork welded from broken signs and gears, serve as memorials or markers. Minstrels repurpose Pip-Boy chiptunes alongside radio standards, creating a soundtrack that is at once mournful and defiant. Satire flourishes. Puppetry and staged mock trials lampoon failed leaders. These cultural forms are not mere refinements. They are technologies of social cohesion, teaching norms and enabling critique. Education is pragmatic and vocational. Apprenticeship is the primary model. A young mechanic learns through repetitive repair under a master's supervision. Apprentice medics practice triage on scarred mannequins and improvised dummies. Literacy programs run where resources allow, often centered in trade hubs or Rivet City labs. Oral curricula emphasize hazard recognition, negotiation etiquette, and local ecology, how to read signs of radstorms, which mushrooms sting, which ruins hide mines. Moral instruction is situational. Mentorship often emphasizes prudence over principle. Leisure is scrappy and inventive. Betting games use bottle caps. Improvised sports rework scavenged parts into goalposts, and storytelling nights become competitive performance. Gambling dens and fight pits proliferate where enforcement is weak. These entertainments both brutalize and bond communities. For children, play is rehearsal. Mock raids, scavenger hunts, and faux trade negotiations teach tactics and social fluency. In quieter moments, people restore old records, hum radio hits, or build small gardens on rooftops, acts of aesthetic repair that resist entropy. Symbols accumulate new valences. A functioning light bulb can be talismanic. A working radio antenna reestablishes a moral ecology of connectedness. Broken monuments are transformed into practical resources. Stone becomes rubble for foundations, statues become barricades, but their image persists in stories and songs. The politics of symbolism is contested. Who controls a repaired monument controls a narrative of continuity. Institutions are minimal but adaptive. Where formal governance collapsed, networks of reciprocity fill gaps. Rotating guards, shared fuel pools, cooperative maintenance schedules. Reputation systems, who fulfill deals, who save lives, function as pseudo-legal frameworks. Markets are informal, but norms, prices for staples, barter equivalences, emerge through repeated interactions. Influxes of resources can destabilize equilibria, making relief both relief and potential weapon. Religion, superstition, and secular ritual coexist. Some worship the bomb. Others maintain itinerant priests offering rites adapted from lost faiths. Superstitions about cursed ruins or haunted tunnels influence routing decisions. These beliefs have practical effects. Taboos can preserve scarce resources by restricting consumption. Pilgrimages can redistribute food and attention. Sacrificial rites may channel communal anger into symbolic victims. Violence in the Capital Wasteland is routine, routinized, and unevenly distributed. It is not a constant roar but a succession of spikes. Raids at dusk, patrols that clear a road for a week, a pitched battle that leaves ruins smoking. Perpetrators range from desperate scavengers to organized slavers, from ideological militias to the technologically advantaged. Raiders trade in speed, surprise, and brutality. Slavers convert bodies into currency. Paramilitary factions attempt to monopolize coercion. Violence organizes space. Roads become unsafe unless escorted. Caravans travel defensively, and settlements prioritize fortification over aesthetic recovery. Tactics are often pragmatic. Raiders favor hit-and-run raids, ambushes at choke points, and traps that exploit predictability. Mines hidden near water pumps, tripwires in narrow alleys, baited caches that lured scavengers. Super mutants employ overwhelming force and shock tactics, using numbers and brute strength to seize territory. The Brotherhood prefers controlled, surgical interventions, patrols to clear mutant lairs, targeted strikes to recover tech, and fortress building that secures supply lines. The Enclave pursues a policy of technological hegemony, vertibird strikes, remote turrets, and bioengineered weapons that shift the calculus of power. In response, civilian strategies emphasize deterrence, watchtowers, signal systems, and the ritualization of patrols that both protect and train communities for conflict. Weapons shape ethics and strategy. Conventional firearms remain common, but scarcity elevates melee weapons, improvised explosives, and traps to prominence. Energy weapons and power armor are force multipliers, rare, costly, and politically consequential. Whoever controls these tools can enforce terms on a region. Repair knowledge and fuel for power systems become strategic assets. Technicians and engineers are as valuable as seasoned fighters. The presence of advanced weaponry polarizes conflicts. It can deter small-scale raiding, but also incentivizes larger actors to seize control. Fortifications are improvisational and symbolic. Sandbag walls, welded metal plates, and statue barricades are functional. Trophies and public executions are performative, signaling the costs of transgression. Defensive architecture also shapes social life. Open markets shrink behind gates. Children play within sightlines, and community centers double as armories. Fortification is thus both protection and confinement. It preserves life while curtailing liberty. War's impact on civilians is multifaceted. Direct casualties are devastating, but the indirect effects, disrupted trade, lost skills, psychological trauma, are equally corrosive. Populations internalize insecurity, altering reproductive choices, migration patterns, and intergenerational knowledge transfer. Trauma manifests in rituals, memorials, oath-giving, rites of passage that normalize risk and valorize survival. Economically, violence depresses investment in public goods. Politically, it legitimizes coercive actors who promise order. Mercenaries and contractors proliferate where governance is weak. They offer protection for pay, escort caravans, or enforce deals, creating markets where security is outsourced. This commodification of safety produces dependencies and moral compromises. A town that can afford mercenaries gains breathing room, but surrenders aspects of autonomy to profit-driven guardians. Guerrilla tactics arise where asymmetry is severe. Small groups use knowledge of terrain, local support networks, and mobility to harass stronger forces. Sabotage, blowing a supply caravan, corrupting a water pump, seeding doubt through misinformation, becomes a political tool. Resistance is rarely purist. It mixes survival, revenge, and ideology, creating fragile coalitions that can splinter under pressure. Long-term consequences of endemic violence include institutional sclerosis and cultural militarization. When survival depends on readiness for combat, social investment skews toward defense. More Smiths, fewer teachers. More watchtowers, fewer libraries. Violence can calcify hierarchies, elevating those who control arms into rulers whose legitimacy is enforced rather than earned. Yet violence also generates innovation, new traits, adaptive governance forms, and hybrid tactics that combine old knowledge with salvageable technology. Ethically, the wasteland forces compromises. Tolerating a brutal protector may save lives now while condemning future generations to authoritarian rule. Refusing cooperation with violent actors may preserve moral purity but cost lives in the present. Fallout 3 stages these dilemmas through quests and consequences, making violence a narrative engine rather than spectacle. The Capital Wasteland's ecology is a palimpsest of pre-war systems overwritten by nuclear distortion. Radiation reshaped food webs, mutated species, and altered habitats. Yet life persists in opportunistic, often grotesque forms. Pre-war flora survives in pockets where soil and water remain relatively untainted, while hardy pioneer species, feral grasses, fungus blooms, and tolerant shrubs, colonize rubble. These plants stabilize soil, create microhabitats, and sometimes carry radioactive burdens that accumulate up the food chain. Human foragers learn to read subtle cues, leaf luster, smell, local lore, to separate edible growth from slow poison. Fauna adapted or emerged anew. Rat scorpions and mirelurks occupy niches once filled by crustaceans and insects, thriving in irradiated wetlands and flooded metro sections. Super mutant populations, genetically engineered and bred in Vault-87's laboratories, represent a human-created apex predator whose social structures and territorial habits reshape human settlement patterns. Feral ghouls, themselves humans transformed by chronic radiation, move through ruins like living archives. Some retain memory and speech, others are driven to ferocity. Packs of wild dogs, mutated reptiles, and opportunistic birds form the everyday soundtrack of ruinous ecologies, scavenging, preying, and competing over scarce resources. Environmental hazards are systemic. Localized radiation hotspots concentrate around military sites, industrial dumps, and cracked infrastructure. Radstorms, sporadic, citywide clouds of heightened radiation, force temporary sheltering and disrupt trade and transport. Flooding, exacerbated by broken dams and clogged waterways, can turn a viable area into a mire within seasons, spreading contamination and creating new predator niches. Structural collapse is omnipresent. Decaying buildings, unstable bridges, and undermined foundations kill without malice. These hazards shape settlement choices, seasonal migration, and the engineering priorities of survivors. Human responses are adaptive and creative. Water purification projects, small boilers, charcoal filters, and later, scientific endeavors like Project Purity seek to convert danger into sustenance. Community engineers retrofitted windmills, cobbled pumps, and solar arrays where parts permit, creating microgrids that power radios, clinics, and irrigation. Waste management is ad hoc. Containment pits, burn sites, and guarded dumps reduce immediate risk but often create long-term zones of toxicity. Ecological remediation is uneven. Some communities prioritize it, seeding clean soils, cultivating raised bed gardens, and rotating crops to avoid local depletion, while others lack the manpower or knowledge to attempt recovery. Cultural adaptations intersect with ecology. Dietary taboos develop around certain mutant species. Recipes evolve to detoxify otherwise poisonous items. Gardening becomes ritualized. Shared seed stocks are sacred, and successful harvests are celebrated as collective achievements. Ecological knowledge is formalized into local curricula: which fungi detoxify when boiled, which wells are seasonal, how to run a hand survey for mines in a field edged with debris. Story and song encode environmental warnings: don't drink the slow river, or watch the black grass in spring, become practical proverbs. Species invasions and niche construction generate novel economies. Mirelurk shells become armor components. Radscorpion chitin is fashioned into blades. Feral ghoul gear is repurposed for patchwork armor. These economies are extractive and fragile. Overharvest a resource, and the local ecology collapses further. Sustainable practices emerge where foresight or necessity allows. Fallow cycles, protected brood sites, and managed wetlands that balance human needs with species persistence. Climate shifts are subtle but consequential. Seasonal extremes, hotter summers, colder winters, accentuate scarcity. Heat waves increase water demand and stress crops. Cold snaps spike mortality when fuel is scarce. Microclimates within ruins, cool, damp basements versus sunlit rooftops, become the basis for specialized economies and social stratification. Those who control warm storage or sunlit terraces hold seasonal leverage. Science and superstition coexist in ecological management. Rivet City's labs attempt evidence-based remediation, while popular belief systems sacralize certain species or sites. The Church of Adam, inverting ecological caution, worships the transformative power of radiation. Where science and ritual align, community action succeeds. Coordinated planting, seed sharing, and mobile purification units reduce morbidity. Where they clash, mistrust derails projects and fosters fatalism. The long-term arc is neither simple recovery nor total collapse. Some landscapes rehabilitate slowly through concerted human effort and natural resilience, producing patches of green and functional agroeconomies. We trace the Capital Wasteland from pre-war civic center to fractured afterlife, stitching together architecture, factions, economy, ecology, and the intimate human traces that survive amid ruin. The region's landmarks, monuments, vaults, museums, and tunnels function as repositories of meaning, each ruin a condensed narrative of ambition, failure, and improvisation. Factions like the Brotherhood, the Enclave, Rivet City, and countless micro-communities embody competing answers to scarcity, preservation, control, scientific restoration, barter, or brood adaptation. Daily life in the wasteland is organized around trade, scavenging, and repair. Culture remakes itself through ritual, satire, and improvisation. Violence and ecological disruption produce both innovation and hardened hierarchies. Memory politics and symbol work determine who counts and who is forgotten. The player's choices thread through these systems, sometimes altering material conditions, always reshaping moral texture. Reading this world as fantasy sharpens rather than dulls its lessons. The Capital Wasteland compresses social collapse into legible elements: infrastructural failure, resource privatization, contested narratives, and the uneven distribution of risk. Stripped of post-apocalyptic allegory, these mechanisms map onto real-world vulnerabilities. The emotional register of the game, the oppressive tunnels, the gutted monuments, the fragile communities, translates into a stark thought experiment about what loss at scale would feel like. The cramped patience of survivors, the economy of favors and skills, the moral trade-offs between immediate survival and institutional futures. These are not just narrative devices, but plausible human responses under conditions of sustained breakdown. Imagining the same collapse in reality makes the game's textures feel crushing rather than merely atmospheric. The intimacy of a mother's holotape or a child's toy in a ruined house becomes unbearable if one remembers such artifacts are human lives, not set dressing. The The tactical calculations, whether to ally with a militarized protector, to concentrate scarce medical resources, to gamble on a fragile public project, become ethically raw when framed as decisions about real people's survival. The essay's recurring image of memory encoded in architecture thus flips from aesthetic effect into moral imperative. Ruins do more than evoke loss. They demand stewardship or honest reckoning. The Capital Wasteland is a fictional laboratory for questions about resilience and justice. It lets players test the social technologies, cooperation, exclusion, barter, ritual, that might persist after catastrophe and observe the trade-offs those systems create. But it also reminds us that in real life the stakes are never hypothetical. The same dynamics that make for compelling gameplay, scarcity, information asymmetry, contested authority, are the ones that would produce real suffering and durable injustice if institutions failed. That recognition is sobering. The aesthetic achievement of Fallout 3 is inseparable from the seriousness of its implication. To inhabit these ruins as a player is to confront how fragile order is, how persistent memory can be, and how heavy the moral burdens are when survival becomes the primary currency.